Hey, Skiba News Nation family. This week we got something extra special for you. We have an exclusive Skiba News Nation special, and it's of my dad's last presentation that he never got to give in full. And this is how he intended it to be heard, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So stay tuned.
The Revelation 12 Nuremberg Connection. How the Copernican Revolution set the stage for the end-time Great Deception. Part 1. How should we understand end-time prophecy? What Rob Skiba believes. Futurism is a view that teaches end-time prophecies are chiefly referring to events which have not yet been fulfilled, but will take place at the end of the age, during a time of worldwide chaos known as the Tribulation and Great Tribulation periods. Futurism also typically has close association with premillennialism. Premillennialism is a view based upon a literal interpretation of Revelation 20:1-6, which describes how Yeshua will physically return to the earth, the second coming, after a time of great tribulation, at which time he will literally rule and reign as King of Kings on earth for 1,000 years. Rob also believes that we are grafted into the cultivated olive tree, which is Israel, legally made a citizen of the Commonwealth of Israel, thus becoming heirs to the blessings of Abraham. He also believes the church is Israel, just as the New Testament writers understood. He believes in taking the Bible literally whenever it is reasonably possible to do so. He also believes the last days will be like the days of Noah. The events of Revelation and most of the events of Matthew 24 and Luke 21 have yet to occur. Both Yeshua and Paul speak in no uncertain terms of a post-tribulation, pre-wrath rapture. Why Rob is a futurist. Revelation was written after the events of 70 AD, not before. The Didache was written in the late 1st century, early 2nd, and was widely distributed and esteemed by early Christians. The last chapter addresses upcoming persecution and the rise of an Antichrist, while encouraging believers to endure in their faith until the end. Chapter 16. Watchfulness. The coming of the Lord. Watch for your life's sake. Let not your lamps be quenched, nor your loins unloosed, but be ready, for you know not the hour in which our Lord will come. But come together often, seeking the things which are benefiting to your souls. For the whole time of your faith will not profit you if you are not made perfect in the last time. For in the last days false prophets and corrupters shall be multiplied, and the sheep shall be turned into wolves, and the love shall be turned into hate. For when lawlessness increases, they shall hate and persecute and betray one another. And then shall appear the world deceiver as Son of God, and shall do signs and wonders. And the earth shall be delivered into his hands, and he shall do iniquitous things, which have never yet come to pass since the beginning. Then shall the creation of men come into the fire of trial, and many shall be made to stumble, and shall perish. But those who endure in their faith shall be saved from under the curse itself. And then shall appear the signs of the truth. First, the sign of an outspreading in heaven. Then the sign of the sound of the trumpet. And third, the resurrection of the dead. Yet not of all, but as it is said, the Lord shall come, and all his saints with him. Then shall the world see the Lord coming upon the clouds of heaven.
Why would they need this to be said if they believed the prophecy had already been fulfilled in 70 AD? Indeed, the more I looked into the early church fathers, the more I saw evidence that they believed they were either in the last days or that it was coming soon, Antichrist and all. Justin Martyr, 100 to 165 AD, Irenaeus, 130 to 202 AD, Clement of Alexandria, 150 to 220 AD, Hippolytus, 170 to 235 AD, Cyprian 200 to 258 AD, Victorinus of Plataea, somewhere in the 200 to 304 AD, and many others who wrote in the first few hundred years following the time of the New Testament. Writers who obviously shared a premillennial view of end times, showing no indication that they believed Revelation was fulfilled by the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple just a few decades or centuries prior.
Why Rob is a futurist. Revelation was written after the events of 70 AD, not before. The Didache. Writing in the late 200s AD, Victorinus of Plataea said, "The time must be understood in which the written apocalypse was published. Since then reigned Caesar Domitian, but before him had been Titus his brother, and Vespasian, Otho, Vitellius, and Galba. These are the 5 who have fallen. One remains, under whom the apocalypse was written, Domitian, to wit. The other has not yet come, speaks of Nerva, and when he has come, he will be for a short time, for he did not complete the period of 2 years." Eusebius and Irenaeus also place Revelation during Domitian's reign. Church History, Book 3, Chapter 18. It is said that in this persecution, the apostle and evangelist John, who was still alive, was condemned to dwell on the island of Patmos in consequence of his testimony to the divine word. Irenaeus, in the 5th book of his work Against Heresies, where he discusses the number of the name of Antichrist, which is given in the so-called Apocalypse of John, speaks as follows concerning him. If it were necessary for his name to be proclaimed openly at the present time, it would have been declared by him who saw the revelation, for it was seen not long ago, but almost in our own generation, at the end of the reign of Domitian.
We know that Domitian reigned from 81 to 96 AD, thus lending further historical evidence that John wrote Revelation in the 90 AD time frame, not the supposed 65 AD time frame held by the preterists. Note also, according to Eusebius 260 to 340 AD, in his writings on church history he said Irenaeus also placed the writings of Revelation during Domitian's reign. I give other early quotes such as these and point out many other internal biblical evidences addressing this issue, a lot more in detail in my blog, Dear Preterists, What Say You? But to be fair, the usual counter-argument deals with the words, quote, which must shortly come to pass, end quote, in Revelation 1. So how can that mean 2,000 years later?
Why Rob is a futurist. Revelation 1 to 3 was certainly relevant to the time in which John wrote to the 7 churches. The tone shifts from chapter 4 forward. In chapter 4:1, we see John is called up to heaven to view things that would happen at some point after the events of the first 3 chapters. As soon as John goes up, he went into God time, which is 1 day equals 1,000 years. Where's the historical evidence for the events described in the 7th seal, trumpet, and bowl judgments? Most of the world's population being killed, massive earthquakes that made every mountain and island move out of place, later to all disappear. All the stars falling to earth, just as Isaiah and Yeshua prophesied. The ministry of the 144,000 and the 2 witnesses. Fiery mountain being tossed into the sea, killing 1/3 of aquatic life. Bottomless pit being opened and 200 million centaur, scorpion, chimeras attacking people. The mark of the beast and the people unable to die. The battle of Armageddon waged against Christ coming on his horse with the host of heaven. Satan bound for 1,000 years and Christ physically ruling on earth. The New Jerusalem city with a 1,500 mile by 1,500 mile base coming down from heaven to the earth.
I believe a reasonable case can be made for the warnings, which must shortly come to pass, given to the 7 churches being relevant for the time John wrote to them. John wrote short letters to each of the 7 churches as directed to him by Christ. Chapter 3 ends with, "He who hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches." These are the things that would shortly come to pass, but then, where is the evidence for 25% of the Earth's population being killed? A massive earthquake moving all the mountains and islands, all the stars falling to Earth.
Why Rob is a futurist. Look at this dating of Revelation. The early date for Revelation AD 65, Nero AD 54 to 68 did not banish Christians. Timothy in Ephesus, Paul doesn't mention John here. No church in Smyrna during this time. Polycarp, letter to the Philippians. All the early Christians held the late date until the 6th century AD. Late date for Revelation AD is 95. Domitian AD 81 to 96 did banish Christians. John in Ephesus, Jesus doesn't mention Timothy here. Behold, he cometh with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of earth shall wail because of him. Even so, Amen. Revelation 1:7. Explain to me again, how exactly is that going to work out for these guys? Millions of them still do not yet have TVs, phones, and the internet yet. Who was Yeshua talking to during the Olivet discourse? The typical dispensational, premillennial, pre-trib rapture argument is that Yeshua was talking to the Jews, not the church in Matthew 24, Luke 21. Dispensation theology is easily refuted by Stephen in Acts 7 and Paul in Romans 11, Ephesians 2, and Galatians 3. All the first believers in Christ were Jewish. Please note, if he was allegedly only talking to the Jews and pre-trib rapture doctrine were true, don't you think that would have been a massively huge sign for him to mention? Yeshua was addressing his followers. First thing he says when asked about the end times is, "Take heed that no man deceive you," which means it is obviously possible for the elect to be deceived. Signs of the end times, Matthew 24. Were the prophecies of Matthew 24 fulfilled in 70 AD? The beginning of sorrows, false Christs, wars and rumors of war, nations rising against nation, persecution of believers, many offended betrayal and hatred of one another, false prophets on the rise, deceiving many, iniquity abounding, and the love of many waxes cold?
This is about as far as I can go when looking at the Olivet discourse in terms of having been fulfilled in 70 AD.
Signs of the End Times, Matthew 24. Prophecies that were not fulfilled in 70 AD. The gospel of the kingdom was not preached in all the world as a witness to all nations by 70 AD. In fact, this still has not yet been accomplished as of 2021. Was all of Asia reached by Paul? Acts 19:10. And this continued by the space of 2 years, so that all they which dwelt in Asia heard the word of the Lord Jesus, both Jews and Greeks. China is among the oldest of civilizations, dating at least as far back as the Shang dynasty, which ruled from the 1600 to the 1046 BC time frame. Some even say China was founded by Fohi Yo, who is their version of Noah, dating as far back as 2200 BC. So there were obviously a lot of people in China by the 1st century AD. Now, a direct flight from Jerusalem to Hong Kong is over 4,800 miles away. So was all of China evangelized on foot between 30 and 70 AD? No, of course not. There is good reason to believe Solomon sent people to the Americas during his reign. Did the apostles evangelize the Americas and beyond between 30 and 70 AD? Ancient Roman forts all the way up in the middle of Scotland that were dated to at least 70 AD. Did any of the apostles make it to Scotland by that time? No, of course not. Even a direct flight from Jerusalem to that site is nearly 2,500 miles away.
Neither were a whole lot of other nation states far removed from Jerusalem. I mean, they've found... I think you get the point. Clearly Matthew 24:14 had not been fulfilled by then, nor has it even to this day.
Signs of the End Times, Matthew 24. Prophecies that were not fulfilled in 70 AD. The gospel of the kingdom was not preached in all the world as a witness to all nations by 70 AD. In fact, this still has not yet been accomplished as of 2021. Abomination of desolation. Those in Judea flee to the mountains. Don't take anything with you, and woe to those who have babies in those days. Pray for your flight is not during the winter time. For then shall be a great tribulation, such as not since the beginning of the world to this time. No, not ever shall be. Matthew 24:21. Except those days be shortened, no flesh would be saved. More warning about false Christs and prophets and where they are to be found. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, Christ appears in the clouds, where he shall meet him in the air. The fig tree generation that sees all of these things will know the end is near. Signs of the End Times, Matthew 24. Primary key points of Matthew 24. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. But of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came, and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. What differentiates the days of Noah from any other time in human history? People have always been eating and drinking, marrying and being given in marriage since Adam and Eve. Is Yahuwah really going to destroy the whole world for doing what he created us to do? If the message is that everything was just business as usual, that begs the question, what were they doing? The only thing that differentiates the days of Noah from any other time in all of human history is the act of genetic modification and the creation of hybrids, which led to the corruption of all flesh. Signs of the End Times, Luke 21. Were the prophecies of Luke 21 fulfilled in 70 AD? Just like with Matthew 24, a reasonable case can be made for the prophecies of Luke 21, 1 through 21, having been fulfilled by the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD. But verse 22 says, all things which are written may be fulfilled. This did not happen in 70 AD. Verse 24 says, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. This has not happened yet. And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And then shall they see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with the power and great glory. And when these things begin to come to pass, then look up, and lift up your heads, for your redemption draws near. Signs of the End Times, Luke 21. And the great earthquake shall be in divers places, and famines, and pestilences, and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven. The Greek word translated terrors is a curious word indeed. In fact, it quite surprised me when I looked it up. It is phobotron, pronounced phobotron, according to Strong's G 5400. Phobotron implies that which causes terror or fright. It comes from the root word phobio, from which we derive our English word phobia. Phobio is that which causes fear, or it can be something that instills great respect or reverence. It can instill awe or amazement, or simply compel us to flee for our lives. Phobotron only appears in the Bible once, just once. Luke is the only one whom the Holy Spirit inspired to use this curious word. One small word that may imply many horrendous events yet to come. The rise of machines, a singularity of sorts. Think of it the next time you watch the movie Terminator. Phobotron. You know, if I wanted to be very speculative, then I might also mention flying machines as a source of terror, and I would connect this sight with the phrase that follows it, great signs from heaven. Sharon Gilbert. Excerpts from her blog, Sheer Speculation on the Greek word phobotron.
On her Welcome to the Mind of a Writer website, 33, author Sharon K. Gilbert had some interesting insight into this particular passage of Scripture.
Signs of the End Times, Luke 21. Two curious end-time prophecies of Luke 21. And great earthquakes shall be in divers places, and famines, and pestilences, and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven. And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, and the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken.
The concept of multiple fulfillments of prophecy. The abomination of desolation, Daniel 9:27, and 1 week shall establish the covenant with many, and in the midst of the week my sacrifice and drink offering shall be taken away, and on the temple shall be the abomination of desolations, and at the end of time an end shall be put to the desolation. 1 Maccabees 1:54. Now the 50th day of the month Caslu, in the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar, and builded idol altars throughout the cities of Judah on every side. Matthew 24:15. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. 2 Thessalonians 2:4. Who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. The concept of multiple fulfillments of prophecy. the war in heaven. Revelation 12:3. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God, and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God, and they should feed her there 1,260 days. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, the old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. And he was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation and strength, and the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb, and by the word of their testimony. And they loved not their lives unto the death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea! For the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, unto her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman. And the earth opened her mouth, and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which kept the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. A reasonable case made by preterists. Thus there was a star resembling a sword, which stood over the city, and a comet that continued a whole year. Thus also before the Jews' rebellion, and before those commotions which preceded the war, when the people were come in great crowds to the feast of unleavened bread on the 8th day of the month Nisan. And at the 9th hour of the night, so great a light shone round the altar and the holy house, that it appeared to be bright daytime, which lasted for half an hour. This light seemed to be a good sign to the unskilful, but was so interpreted by the sacred scribes as to portend those events that followed immediately upon it. Besides these, a few days after that feast, on the 21st day of the month Iyar, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, were it not related by those that saw it, and were not the events that followed it of so considerable a nature as to deserve such signals. For before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds, and surrounding the cities. Moreover, at that feast which we call Pentecost, as the priests were going by night into the inner court of the temple, as their custom was, to perform their sacred ministrations, they said that, in the first place, they felt a quaking and heard a great noise, and after that they heard a sound as of a great multitude, saying, Let us remove hence. This is from the Wars of the Jews, Book 6, Chapter 5, Section 3.
He goes on to describe the eastern gate of the inner court, opening on its own. Then he says, Another 1st and early 2nd century Roman historian named Tacitus also wrote about this event.
The concept of multiple fulfillments of prophecy. A reasonable case made by preterists. Prodigies had occurred which this nation, prone to superstition, but hating all religious rites, did not deem it lawful to expiate by offerings and sacrifice. There had seen hosts joining battle in the skies, and the fiery gleam of arms, the temple illuminated by a sudden radiance from the clouds. The doors of the inner shrine were suddenly thrown open, and a voice of more than mortal tone was heard to cry that the gods were departing. At the same instant there was a mighty stir as of departure. Some put a fearful meaning on these events, but in most there was a firm persuasion that in ancient records of their priests was contained a prediction of how at this very time the East was to grow powerful and rulers coming from Judea were to acquire universal empire. Tacitus, Histories, Book 5.
A medieval historian named Saphir Yesipin, perhaps merely relaying the same story as told by Josephus and Tacitus, also wrote,
A reasonable case made by preterists. For 1 year before Vespasian came, a single great star shining like unsheathed swords was seen over the temple. And in those days, when the sign was seen, it was a holiday of Passover, and during that entire night the temple was lit up and illuminated like the light of day, and thus it was all 7 days of the Passover. All the sages of Jerusalem knew that it was a malevolent sign, but the rest of the ignorant people said that it was a benevolent sign. Now, it happened after this, that there was seen from above over the Holy of Holies, for the whole night, the outline of a man's face, the like of whose beauty had never been seen in the land, and his appearance was quite awesome. Moreover, in those days were seen chariots of fire and horsemen, a great force of flying across the sky near the ground, coming against Jerusalem, and all the land of Judah, and all the horses of fire and riders of fire. When the holiday of Shavuos came in those days, during the night, the priests heard within the temple something like the sword of men going, and the sound of men marching in a multitude going into the temple, and a terrible and mighty voice was heard, speaking, Let's go and leave this house. This came from Sefer Yosepon, A Medieval History of Ancient Israel, Chapter 87, Burning of the Temple.
And there are other quotes along similar lines which you can read here. As justification, preterists will typically cite a prophecy from Isaiah 66:15, which says, For behold, Yahuwah will come in fire, and his chariots like the whirlwind, to render his anger with fury, and his rebuke with flames of fire. For by fire and his sword will the Lord plead with all flesh, and the slain of the Lord shall be many. End of verse. The problem is, if you read the previous chapter, you will see this is in a millennial reign context, at the time when the wolf lies with the lamb, and a person dying at 100 years of age is considered a child. So the very proof text they use is actually in and as yet to happen, future fulfillment of prophecy, not past. Now for another interesting war in heaven event.
Part 3. An interesting timeline emerges. An interesting timeline of events begins to emerge. October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther issues his 95 Thesis in Wittenberg, Germany. The Society of Jesus Jesuit order was formed in Paris, France in the year 1540, officialized in Rome. In 1543, Copernicus's book on the revolutions of the celestial spheres was published in Nuremberg, Germany, thus setting the stage for undermining the truth of creation as told by the scriptures. Copernicus rejected by the reformers. We will see some who are so deranged not only in religion, but who in all things reveal their monstrous nature that they will say that the sun does not move, and that it is the earth which shifts and turns. When we see such minds, we must indeed confess that the devil possessed them. Sermon on 1 Corinthians 10, 19-24, Calvini Opera Selecta Corpus Reformatorum. There is talk of a new astronomer who wants to prove that the earth moves and goes around instead of the sky, the sun, the moon, just as if someone were moving in a carriage or ship might hold that he was sitting still and at rest while the earth and the trees walked and moved. But that is how things are nowadays. When a man wishes to be clever, he must needs invent something special, and the way he does it must needs be the best. The fool wants to turn the whole art of astronomy upside down. However, as Holy Scriptures tells us, so did Joshua bid the sun to stand still and not the earth. Martin Luther. In response to the publication of the Brief Commentarius, which appeared a decade before De Revolutionibus. This comes from Luther's table book, Tischreden, or Record of Dinner Table Conversations. An interesting timeline of events begins to emerge. In response to the emerging Protestant Reformation, the Council of Trent in Italy is formed. It was the 19th Ecumenical Council of the Roman Catholic Church, held in 3 parts from 1545 to 1563. Prompted by the Reformation, the Council of Trent was highly important for its sweeping degrees of self-reform and for its dogmatic definitions that clarified virtually every doctrine contested by the Protestants. Despite internal strife and 2 lengthy interruptions, the Council was a key part of the Counter-Reformation and played a vital role in revitalizing the Roman Catholic Church in many parts of Europe. Among other things addressed, it was here that the canon of the Old and New Testament was fixed. Tradition was accepted as a source of faith. The Latin Vulgate was declared adequate for doctrinal proofs. The number of sacraments was fixed at 7, and the nature and consequences of original sin were defined. After months of intense debate, the Council ruled against Luther's doctrine of justification by faith alone. Also, the Eucharist was defined as the real presence of Christ, and purgatory, indulgences, veneration of the saints, and other such things were made doctrine.
What I am about to show you is something I was made aware of a few years ago by my friend Tony Martin. He's done a lot more research on this than I have, but in summary,
in the morning of April 14th, 1561, at daybreak between 4 and 5 a.m., a dreadful apparition occurred on the sun and then was seen in Nuremberg, in the city, before the gates and in the country, by many men and women. At first there appeared in the middle of the sun 2 blood-red semicircle arcs, just like the moon in its last quarter. And in the sun, above and below, and on both sides, the color was blood. There stood a round ball of partly dull, partly black ferrous color. Likewise, there stood on both sides, and there was a torus about the sun, such blood-red ones, and other balls in large number, about 3 in a line and 4 in a square, also some alone. In between these globes there were visible a few blood-red crosses, between which there were blood-red stripes, becoming thicker to the rear, and in the front malleable like the rods of reed grass, which were intermingled, among them 2 big rods, one on the right and one on the left, and within the small and big rods there were 3, also 4 and more globes. These all started to fight amongst themselves, so that the globes which were first in the sun flew out into the one standing on both sides thereafter. The globes standing outside of the sun and the small and large rods flew into the sun. Besides, the globes flew back and forth among themselves and fought vehemently with each other for over an hour. And when the conflict in and again out of the sun was most intense, they became fatigued to such an extent that they all, as above, fell from the sun down upon the earth as if all burned, and they were then wasted away on the earth with immense smoke. After all this, there was something like a black spear, very long and thick, sighted, and the shaft pointed to the east and pointed to the west. Whatever such sign mean, God alone knows. Although we have seen shortly, one after another, many kinds of signs on the heaven, which are sent to us by the Almighty God to bring us to repentance, we still are unfortunately so ungrateful that we despise such high signs and miracles of God, or we speak of them with ridicule and disregard them to the wind, in order that God may send us a frightening punishment on the account of our ungratefulness. After all, the God-fearing will by no means discard these signs, but will take it to heart as a warning of their merciful Father in heaven, will mend their lives and faithfully beg God that he may avert his wrath, including the well-deserved punishment on us, so that we may temporarily here and perpetually there live as his children. For it may God grant us his help. Amen. Hans Glacier, letter painter of Nuremberg. Very similar apparitions of knights fighting in the skies were frequently reported during the 30-Year War, which was 1618 to 1648. Many similar broadsheets of wondrous signs exist in German and Swiss archives, and Nuremberg seems to focus on a number of them, presumably because of the hardships and conflicts of the ex-prosperous. Such conditions typically accentuate apocalyptic thought. Otto Billing, Flying Saucers, Magic in the Skies, Schiemann, 1982, pages 48 to 45.
In 1566, a similar event occurred over Basel, Switzerland. Note, Basel had a burgeoning academic and scientific community at the time.
It happened in 1566 3 times, on 27 and 28 of July, and on August 7th. Against the sunrise and sunset, we saw strange shapes in the sky above Basel. During the year of 1566, on the 27th of July, after the sun had shone warm on the clear, bright skies, and then around 9 p.m. it suddenly took a different shape and color. First, the sun lost all its radiance and luster, and it was no bigger than the full moon, and finally it seemed to weep tears of blood, and the air behind him went dark. And he was seen by all the people of the city and countryside. In much the same way also the moon, which had already been almost full and has shone through the night, assuming an almost blood-red color in the sky. The next day, Sunday, the sun rose at about 6 o'clock and slept with the same appearance it had when it was lying before. He lit the houses, streets, and were around as if everything was blood-red and fiery. At the dawn of August 7th, we saw large black spheres coming and going with great speed and precipitations before the sun and chattered as if they led a fight. Many of them were fiery red and soon crumbled and then extinguished.
For much more on all of that, please check out the recent interview I did with Tony Martin on my YouTube channel.
A special thanks to Joshua Thomas for sharing this sunrise picture at Red River, New Mexico on January 9, 2015, and for Les Crowley from Atmospheric Optics, who helped identify some of the very, very rare optical phenomenon in this picture.
In that interview, we took a look at an interesting timeline of events, which really kick off with the Reformation and Copernicus. Now, to be fair, some have argued that Hans Glaser was prone to tabloid-like sensationalism. He clearly viewed the events as signs from God of religious significance. And of course, the Ancient Aliens crowd has their take on it. Others say there may be more quote-unquote reasonable ways of understanding what happened back then from a scientific perspective. All I can say is it was a very interesting set of events during a very interesting time in history. You'll have to do your own research and decide.
An interesting timeline of events begins to emerge. October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther issues his 95 Theses in Wittenberg, Germany. The Society of Jesus Jesuit Order was formed in Paris, France in the year 1540, officialized in Rome. In 1543, Copernicus's book on the revolutions of the celestial spheres was published in Nuremberg, Germany, thus setting the stage for undermining the truth of creation as told by the scriptures and kicking off the scientific revolution and the humanist age of enlightenment. Copernicus rejected by the reformers. And then in 1561 to 1566, massive USO flaps over Nuremberg, Germany, and Basel, Switzerland. From 1573 to 1601, Tycho Brahe builds upon Copernicus's work while inserting his own geocentric ideas into the field of astronomy. Note, he dedicated his observatory Uraniborg to Urania, the pagan goddess muse of astronomy. In 1596, Johannes Kepler published The Cosmographic Mystery, within which he attempted to reconcile Copernican idea with scripture. Then, after working for the late Tycho Brahe in 1609, building upon the works of both Copernicus and Brahe, he published Astronomia Nova, proposing elliptical orbits for some of the planets in a heliocentric system. The King James Bible is published in 1611 with some of the above influences, inserting the word planets into 2 Kings 23:5. The 30-Year Wars was fought primarily in Germany from 1618 to 1648. An estimated 4.5 to 8 million people were killed, including up to 60% of the German population during this time. The Great Puritan Migration to North America happens from 1620 to 1640, the black arrow pointing west.
Again, refer to the interview I did with Tony Martin for his theories on the meaning of the black arrowhead in the Nuremberg UFO flap.
An interesting timeline of events begins to emerge. In 1632, Galileo publishes his dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, resulting in him being found to be vehemently suspect of heresy. In 1666, Isaac Newton gets bonked on the head with an apple and comes up with his theory of gravity. On May 1st, 1776, the Illuminati is founded in Germany. July 4th, 1776, America declares its independence from England. 1830 to 1833, Charles Lyell publishes his theories of geology in terms of very long ages, based on uniformitarianism. 1859, Charles Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species, which becomes the foundation of evolutionary biology. 1871, Albert Pike writes to Giuseppe Mazzini an Illuminati outline for 3 world wars. The First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia and of making that country a fortress of atheistic communism. The divergences caused by the agentur, or agents, of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. At the end of this war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken the religions. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would be then restrained and held back in check until the time we would need it for the final social cataclysm. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the State of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists. We shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all of its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery and of the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deist spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal but without the knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in the public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time.
Some claim this letter is a hoax, yet it was known to have existed as early as 1910, 4 years before the start of World War I, which played out exactly as Pike stated.
In 1632, Galileo publishes his dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, resulting in him having found to be vehemently suspect of heresy. In 1666, Isaac Newton gets bonked on the head with an apple and comes up with his theory of gravity. On May 1, 1776, the Illuminati is founded in Germany. On July 4, 1776, America declares its independence from England. 1830 to 1833, Charles Lyell publishes his theories of geology in terms of very long ages based on uniformitarianism. 1859, Charles Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species, which becomes the foundation of evolutionary biology. 1871, Albert Pike writes to Giuseppe Mazzoni an Illuminati outline for 3 world wars. 1878, The Seat of Satan, you can see that in Revelations 2, 12 through 13, is excavated and then eventually moved from Pergamum to Germany.
Meanwhile, by the time we arrived in the 20th century, we had completely thrown out the biblical creation model, now believing a microscopic dot, floating in nothing, exploded in a cosmic fart, resulting in an ever-expanding cosmos, wherein molten rock can spawn life, which ultimately led to gender-confused humans as the top of the evolutionary chain, having arrived from goo to you by the way of the zoo. This is called science. And with people no longer recognizing themselves in the image and likeness of a good creator, it didn't take long for the whole world to slide into a massive war.
(1901). The Seat of Satan installed in Berlin. The first museum was demolished in 1909 and replaced with a much larger museum in 1930. 1914 to 1918, World War I kicks off with Germany. By the end of World War I, 16 million people had been killed. 1927 to 1938, Nazi Party Nuremberg rallies. Hitler rises to power in 1933, holding huge rallies there from 1933 to 1938. He establishes the Third Reich, meaning Third Realm or Third Empire, recognizing Nazi Germany was a successor to the earlier Holy Roman Empire, which was from 800 to 1806, and the German Empire, 1871 to 1918. An interesting timeline of events begins to emerge. 1939 to 1945. World War II kicks off with Germany, Hitler invading Poland on September 1st, 1939. The Third Reich, which Hitler and the Nazis referred to as a 1,000-year Reich, which ended May 1945, just after 12 years. Then the Allies defeated Germany, ending World War II in Europe. By that time, over 75 million people had been killed. 1945 to 1946. Nuremberg trials. They were military tribunals held, out of which came the 1947 Nuremberg Code for medical practices. 1946 to 1947, the first of the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. More have been found between 1948 and today. 1946 through 1947, Admiral Byrd and Operation High Jump. 1947, Roswell event occurs, kicking off modern-age UFO and tales of alien abduction being done by beings from another world. 1950 to today, non-stop movies, TV shows, comic books, and other propaganda, even from science, in all forms of mainstream media, perpetuating the idea of life on other planets and beings from other worlds visiting ours.
I mean, we've had 17 seasons of Ancient Aliens, running on the History Channel.
What is the real shape of the Earth and nature of the cosmos? Admiral Byrd, Antarctica, and Project Fishbowl. First, Admiral Byrd goes to the North Pole and claims to have found an entrance to inner Earth. Hollow Earth Theory, 1926. After World War II, the nations, especially Germany, Russia, and the United States, become obsessed with Antarctica. 1946 to 1947, Admiral Byrd leads Operation High Jump. 1955 to 1956, Admiral Byrd leads Operation Deep Freeze. Almost immediately after the nations form the Antarctic Treaty, the U.S. and Russia start launching nukes into the sky, and NASA and DARPA are formed.
In the U.S., we called our part in the bombing of the sky Operation Fishbowl. Yeah, indeed, things got very interesting after Operation Deep Freeze. And oh yeah, and it's probably just a coincidence that the CIA/government sponsored mind control, the campaign known as MK Ultra. And it just so happens to be in operation from 1953 to 1973. Running all through the entire U.S. space program, from Gemini to the end of Apollo. The so-called scientific revolution kicked off with Copernicus. Shortly thereafter, we had the 1561 UFO flap over Nuremberg. What if that war in heaven was just the beginning of the final spiritual battle, which will launch us into the great deception of the last days? Consider this.
Now, with the tinfoil hat on, playing conspiracy theory here, it looks like, at least from the flat earther perspective, that probably during Operation Deep Freeze, they may have found the edge of the dome, presumably anywhere from 800 to 1,200 miles inland from the coast. So let's just do a quick recap here. 1. Everyone becomes obsessed with Antarctica in the late 40s and late 50s. 2. Everyone leaves Antarctica to draft up a treaty which would prohibit anyone from going there except under the express strict guidelines of the treaty. 3. The United States creates NASA and DARPA, you know, that organization which creates black budget projects for the military and other agencies and other groups. 4. The United States and Russia start blowing up the sky. 5. The United States and Russia become obsessed with what's above us in space. 6. The United States and Russia become obsessed with what's beneath us.
Several decades ago, two countries, America and Russia, raced to drill the deepest hole into the Earth with the goal of discovering what was at its core. Both projects were massive undertakings, and the world was fixated on what mysteries they'd find beneath the surface. Russia's efforts resulted in something called the Kola Super Deep Borehole, and when you see it, you might have to pick your jaw off the floor. Both countries drilled boreholes deep into the ground until they couldn't go any further. They used enormous metal contraptions that were designed to break through even the toughest material. The world watched in awe as the Americans kicked off the race. The enormous drills were fired up, and everyone hoped the project would go according to plan. What kind of mysteries would the drillers find, if any? The United States called the endeavor Project Mohole, and they began their drilling off the Pacific coast of Mexico in 1961. This would be a massive effort with global interests, and there was a lot riding on the team's work.
You guys starting to see the timeline here? 1961.
Unfortunately, soon after the project began, it was abandoned due to lack of funding.
Lack of funding because they decided to put all their funding into going to Antarctica looking for moon rocks and faking the whole world with the moon landings.
Almost a decade later, the Russians had organized their own drilling team and began their quest to reach the center of the Earth. On May 24th, 1970, they set their sights on the Kola Peninsula. The Russians called their endeavor the Kola Super Deep Borehole. The end goal of the drilling project was to reach a depth of 49,000 feet into the Earth's crust. The race to the center of the Earth was an exciting and intriguing time for the world. In the end, the goal was never reached, but at least the scientific community benefited from the efforts. Though defunct, this phenomenal structure still stands as a reminder of one project that had the world on the edge of its seat.
Okay, so they didn't get to 49,000. They only got to something like, I think he said 40,200 or something like that, which is less than 8 miles.
Even the deepest drilled hole is still some 3,955 miles short of the center of the Earth. Barely a pinprick on the surface of our planet.
So we have all these pictures in the textbook about the center of the Earth and what the core of the Earth and everything else looks like, and they're going to say, all right, it's all fiction about the inner Earth and hollow Earth, all that stuff, when they have never even gone deeper than 8 miles. It's unbelievable. We have been lied to with artwork, pictures, paintings, drawings, CGI, everything about our Earth and everything about space, artwork. And oh, by the way, you know, okay, we're in a race, right? And we supposedly beat Russia in the space race, whatever that means. You know, we did something more than or faster or whatever. Who cares? They just gave up? Really? They just gave up? I quit. I'm going home. No, they didn't give up. They sent dozens of missions to Antarctica while we were doing the Apollo program. Let that sink in. Okay. I gotta say, it sure looks to me like they found something in Antarctica which challenged everything we thought we knew, and thus they immediately set out to find how high our enclosed world dome is and how deep the foundation goes. That's exactly what somebody would do if they discovered they were in a cage. They try to figure out wait a minute, what are the boundaries? How do I get out of here? That's exactly all of the activities that the United States and Russia in particular engaged in immediately after Operation Deep Freeze all points to exactly that. I don't know how you could come to any other conclusion. They started acting exactly like people stuck in a cage. They started immediately trying to figure out the boundaries. That's exactly what they would do. So it appears that whatever happened in Antarctica, everybody got kind of maybe nervous or excited or whatever and said, okay, what is the deal? You know, we've looked through telescopes. We've seen our so-called neighbors, Venus and Mars, through telescopes. Our assumption is the solar system is, you know, set up in the Copernican model. And, but yet maybe they found a dome and they started to question all that. So the first thing they do is send out probes to go, wait a minute, what in the world? If we're in a dome, how high does this thing go? So they start launching high altitude nuclear bombs, and if you look at the videos on Operation Fishbowl and Starfish Prime and all those high altitude tests, I mean, it looks like they're hitting something up there. I mean, at least from a conspiratorial tinfoil hat wearing perspective, that's what it looks like. Now, this is what blew my mind. You can read more on all that if you'd like. To get caught up to speed on what's going on there. So I go to Lubbock, and I'm doing this conference out there at Jared Cressman's father's church, Pastor Dan Cressman, and we get to talking about this whole issue of the flat earth stuff. And he goes, do you know what the name Dominic means? And I said, no. He says, you know, you talk about Operation Fishbowl, but check this out. I'm going to take you to, I'll put the screen share back up here. Take you to a one of those name websites. I like using behindthename.com. Look up the name Dominic, D-O-M-I-N-I-C, from the late Latin name Dominicus, meaning of the Lord. Fishbowl was part of Operation Dominic. It looks like they are sending high-altitude nuclear bombs to test the fishbowl of the Lord, i.e., the firmament. Yeah, this is definitely one of those things to make you go,
The Revelation 12 Nuremberg Connection, Part 4, The Absurdities of Modern Science, How the Copernican Revolution Set the Stage for the End-Time Great Deception. Today's scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation, and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. Nikola Tesla. Usually in science, if we're off by a factor of 2 or a factor of 10, we call that horrible. We say, something's wrong with the theory. We're off by a factor of 10. However, in cosmology, we're off by a factor of 10 to the 120. That is 1 with 120 zeros after it. This is the largest mismatch between theory and experiment in the history of science. That's Michio Kaku.
Modern science today is based entirely on works of Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, Lyell, Darwin, Huxley, all men who put forward ideas directly contrary to Scripture. So, where has that led us? We'll start with cosmology, the foundation for all the other evolutionary, quote, sciences, falsely so-called.
The Revelation 12 Nuremberg Connection, Scientific American. Cosmology has some big problems. The field relies on a conceptual framework that has trouble accounting for new observations. Written April 30th, 2019. Modern cosmology is in serious need of a reboot. Compounding this problem, most observations of the universe occur experimentally and indirectly. Today's space telescopes provide no direct view of anything. They produce measurements through an interplay of theoretical predictions and pliable parameters, in which the model is involved every step of the way. The framework literally frames the problem. It determines where and how to observe. And so, despite the advanced technologies and methods involved, the profound limitations of the endeavor also increase the risk of being led astray by the kind of assumptions that cannot be calculated.
He goes on to say,
a key piece of the Big Bang paradigm was criticized by one of the theory's original proponents for having become indefensible as a scientific theory. Why? Because inflation theory relies on ad hoc contrivances to accommodate almost any data, and because of its proposed physical field is not based on anything with empirical justification. This is probably because a crucial function of inflation is to bridge a transition from an unknowable Big Bang to a physics we can recognize today. So, is it science or a convenient invention?
he concludes his article by admitting,
in order to maintain a mathematically unified theory valid for the entire universe, we must accept that 95% of our cosmos is furnished by completely unknown elements and forces for which we have no empirical evidence whatsoever.
what is taught today as fact is really nothing more than unproven ad hoc theories based on presupposition, delivered from outlandish conjecture, which itself was contrived by sheer fantasy, all of which ends up beautifully illustrated by the hands of artists and published in textbooks as self-evident truth. If you want to see how bad it's gotten and where we are with the quote-unquote science of cosmology,
Oh, really?
Wow!
beer mug hyperspace multi-bubble verse. Really?
Beer.
Seriously? They're farting out beer bubble universes. Okay? That's what they're doing. Hey, I got an idea. Yep. Multi-beer bubble universe. And they call that science. And they make fun of us? Really? Yeah, I'm not going to take that from them anymore. I'm not going to sit here and let people who think they came from monkeys out of a beer bubble universe ridicule me for looking into what I'm looking into and considering, a possibility. If you guys can think about beer bubble universes, then I can think about a snow globe. Fair enough? Okay, let's move on.
What is the shape of the earth? Remember what Yeshua said, Matthew 24:3. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world? And Jesus answered them, and said, Take heed that no man deceive you. Strong's Concordance, 4105, planeo, means to cause to wonder, short definition, lead astray, deceive, 4105, planeo, properly go astray, get off course, to deviate from the correct path, roaming into error, wandering, be misled. It is also the root of the English term planet, wandering body. This term nearly always conveys the sin of roaming into sin. To cause to wander, 4106, plain, short definition, a wandering, fig, deceit, delusion, error, sin. 4106, it is a feminine noun derived from what God says is true, an error, deception, which results in wandering or roaming into sin, i.e. prompting them to also stray from God's circle of safety or sound doctrine. 4108, planos, wandering, leading astray, deceiver, misleading, a deceiver. It also means impostor, derived from planeo, wonder, a deceiver trying to get others to also veer off God's course or path of safety. 4107, planetes. It's a masculine noun derived from planeo, to wander, properly a wandering star, planet, figuratively a false teacher operating without moral compass and exploiting other aimless people.
So whenever we say quote-unquote planet Earth, we are saying the wandering, deceptive Earth that leads others astray from the circle of Yahuwah's safe truth. Keep that in mind. But even in the early 20th century, all initial observations, even at high altitude, were of a flat, non-rotating Earth. Consider
Popular Science Magazine, August 1931. What did the first man to reach the stratosphere have to say about the Earth's shape? It seemed a flat disk with an upturned edge. Dr. Augusta Piccard, 1931. What is the shape of the Earth? The first men to reach the stratosphere. Sky violet in color at 11-mile elevation. Soaring in their airtight balloon gondola to the record-breaking height of 11.8 miles above the Earth, the other day 3 Russian aeronauts brought back the first scientific observation ever made at such great an altitude. Above their heads, the sky provided a striking spectacle. Its color had turned to a soft, deep violet, almost devoid of the light-reflecting haze found at lower levels. Looking down, they tried in vain to detect any curvature of the Earth's horizon. Following their successful voyage to the stratosphere, in the gondola illustrated above, still higher ascents are planned. It also says on the right, it seemed a flat disk with unturned edge.
a couple of years later, the Russians got to 62,304. You can even start looking into more recent government publications. You'll find some interesting stuff, such as...
We go forward about a decade to the 1940s, 1948. This is an official CIA, look up here, CIA.gov, okay? CIA declassified document from the Russians. I'm going to pull it up here in Adobe Acrobat. It's a little easier because I've already highlighted some stuff here, same document. All right, so the subject is Earth measurements, 1948, Moscow, Russia. Outer gravitational field and shape of the physical surface of the Earth. They're trying to figure out the shape of the Earth? Wait a minute. I thought we knew the shape of the Earth since Pythagoras and Eratosthenes, right? Well, apparently the Russians didn't get the memo. A study is made of the coordinates necessary for the solvability and uniqueness of solution of an integral equation by the aid of which the outer gravitational field and the shape of the physical surface of the Earth may be determined. So we go through this document a little bit here. It says the methods of studying the shape of the Earth. So this is what their goal is here. They're outlining some of that. The shape of the physical surface of the Earth can be determined with sufficient reliability on the basis only of data obtained from exact measurements. Well, that goes without saying, I suppose. And let's keep going down here. Let's see. We can regard the potential of the real Earth, by this equation here apparently, as known correct to an additive constant at all points of the physical surface of the Earth and only on the surface, whereas it is not determinable at all other points of space without knowledge of the shape of the Earth. So they're still trying to figure out the shape of the Earth here. But since the shape of the Earth is not known, 1948, the true coordinates of these points, B, L, and H, are unknown to us. So the Russians are having trouble figuring out the shape of the Earth in 1948. Let's look at another document here. Another declassified CIA document up here, right? They're checking out the firmament in this one. Let's go back to Acrobat. 1953 now. Geophysics light scattering, USSR. Trying to figure out how does light work in the atmosphere here. So we get down to page 19 here. It says dissertations defended in the Scientific Council of the Institute of Physics of the Earth, Institute of Physics of the Atmosphere, and Institute of Applied Geophysics, USSR, 1957. March 1957. Looks like March 23, 1957, apparently. The dissertation represents the result of many years of study of the clear daytime sky. The observations were carried out in 12 locations at various altitudes above the sea, various climatic, meteorological, and synoptic conditions. The observations were carried out mainly during high transparency of the atmosphere in the visual range of the spectrum in the absence of a snow cover. In the investigations, 2 instruments designed by V.G. Fezenkov were used. One of these was a visual photometer of the daytime sky intended for measuring the brightness of the firmament. Interesting. Trying to figure out the brightness of the firmament. Again, 1957. The dissertation contains a certain formula of the brightness of the sky, taking into consideration only the brightness of the first order, and derived, get this now, on the assumption of a flat Earth, and giving some conclusions derived on the basis of this formula. So the Russians are trying to check out the firmament based on assumptions of a flat Earth in 1957? Very interesting, huh?
How old is the Earth and how do we know? Uniformitarianism versus Catastrophism. From 1830 to 1833, his multi-volume Principles of Geology was published. The work's subtitle was An Attempt to Explain the Former Changes of the Earth's Surface by Reference to Causes Now in Operation. He was, along with the early John Playfair, the major advocate of James Hutton's idea of uniformitarianism, that the Earth was shaped entirely by slow-moving forces, still in operation today, acting over a very long period of time, as opposed to catastrophism, an idea of abrupt geological changes through violent action.
Thus, he looked at the stripes in the rock and assumed millions of years of erosion. Today, this is the accepted view of geology. But how accurate are our dating methods?
How old is the Earth and how do we know? Uniformitarianism versus Catastrophism. Immanuel Velikovsky's World in Collision. Also, Earth in Upheaval. These books show the vivid documentation of cataclysmic evolution. Origin of multicellularity. Gender is fluid?
When researchers sat down to compare the chimp and human genomes, those single-letter differences were easy to tally, but the big mismatch sections weren't. For example, if a genetic paragraph, thousands of letters long, appears twice in a human scroll, but only once in its chimp counterpart, should that second human copy count as thousands of changes, or just one? And what about identical paragraphs that appear in both genomes, but in different places, or in reverse order, or broken up into pieces? Rather than monkey around with these difficult questions, the researchers simply excluded all the large mismatched sections, a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours.
Made out of a blob or in the image of God. The late Nobel Prize winner Professor Francis Crick, OMFRS, along with British chemist Leslie Orgel, proposed the theory of directed panspermia in 1973, a co-discoverer of the double helixal structure of the DNA molecule. Crick found it impossible that the complexity of DNA could have evolved naturally.
And so the idea of panspermia was born. The idea that ancient aliens must have seeded our world to kickstart evolution.
And this is now becoming the new standard. Thus, when asked what if intelligent design was a plausible solution to the evolution of man, this is what Richard Dawkins has to say.
It sounds very laudable to teach the controversy, to teach both theories, but there aren't two theories. There's only one theory around. There's only one game in town as far as serious science is concerned. Of course, you get negative reactions from creationists, but who cares about creationists? They don't know anything.
We're Johnny-come-latelys. We live in the cosmic boondocks. We emerged from microbes and muck. Apes are our cousins.
You don't believe that the Earth is round only if you're an astronaut. You don't believe Napoleon existed only if you're a historian. You believe these things because they're facts proved by evidence. Evolution is also a demonstrated fact. The truth really is out there. It's not a matter of opinion.
People are extremely illogical.
I'm skeptical of the claim.
I'm skeptical.
I'm skeptical.
Yes, skeptical.
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 Skeptical of claims
for the ability of random mutations
and natural selection
to account for the complexity of life.
Careful examination
of the evidence
for Darwinian theory
should be encouraged.
Thankfully, there are many in the scientific community finally taking at least a skeptical approach to Darwin's bogus theories. But if you've seen the documentary Expelled, you will note how hard it is for scientists and teachers to buck this system.
NASA estimates 1 billion Earths in our galaxy alone. Study says 40 billion planets in our galaxy could support life. Our galaxy might be home to 10 billion Earth-like planets. There could be up to 10 billion warm and cozy Earth-like planets in our home galaxy, new research reveals. 8.8 billion habitable Earth-sized planets exist in Milky Way alone.
And we have NASA and other space agencies constantly trying to get us excited about other Earth-like planets out there.
A question of origins. When it comes to belief, here are our choices. In the beginning, Yahuwah created the heavens and the earth, and he made us in his own image. Or, in the beginning, nothing farted out the heavens and the earth, and we got here from goo to you by the way of the zoo. Or, in the beginning, nothing farted out the heavens and the earth, and E.T. seeded the goo to make you. When you proceed from a false premise, your conclusions will tend to end in sheer madness.
And so the idea of panspermia is now mainstream. The idea that ancient aliens must have seeded our world to kickstart evolution, this is now the new standard.
A question of origins. When it comes to belief, here are our choices. We can believe what our education taught us, a round ball, or we can believe a pear-shaped Earth, or we can believe NASA's composite images, or we can believe in the enclosed Earth. Let God be true, but every man a liar. Romans 3:4.
Part 5. Why would they lie to us? It doesn't take much research at all to see they lied to us about our origins. They lied to us about our history. They lied to us about our political system. They've lied to us about JFK, the moon landing, 9/11, and much, much more. They've lied about gravity, fuel, and energy. They've intentionally dumbed us all down through media and the public education system. They've lied to us about nutrition and healthcare. They've drugged us all out of our minds for profit. They constantly get us to kill each other in unconstitutional wars. They've convinced us that they are the good guys and must be trusted. They've told us God and the Bible are not true. Thus, Scripture is not to be a trusted source for truth. They've literally turned quote-unquote science, falsely so-called, into God. They've lied to us about geology, biology, archaeology. So what possible reason do we have to trust them concerning cosmology? Through the Copernican revolution and the Big Bang cosmology that came from it, they've convinced us we are nothing but evolved goo floating on a dust ball shooting through empty space. They've convinced us aliens are our creators and they are coming back. Come on, really?
Why would they lie to us? In science we trust? Freedom from religion foundation? Why would they lie to us? The religious prophets of scientism. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Romans 1:22.
Why would they lie to us? What's their motivation? 1. First, get people to doubt Yahuwah's word by destroying the very foundation of our Bible, Genesis through specifically the creation account. 2. Set up a new paradigm where God is out and quote-unquote science is in. Evolution removes Yahuwah from the equation. 3. When evolution finally runs its course and becomes utterly bankrupt, introduce the idea of quote-unquote intelligent design, but deny the true designer his due credit and place it rather on quote-unquote ancient aliens. 4. Promote the ancient alien theme as much as possible in all forms of media by perpetrating the concept of Earth as a tiny blue marble orbiting an average sun in an average galaxy among trillions of other galaxies in an ever-expanding universe with so much quote-unquote potential for life to exist in such a vast expanse. The idea of alien scientists being our creator seems a lot more plausible over time and heavy indoctrination. 5. The stage is set for our quote-unquote alien creators to return and bestow upon us their quote-unquote miracle signs and wonders in order to convince us all the more that all religions are false. We then put our trust in them. Finally, when Christ does return, we are all convinced that he is the enemy, and our united world gathers together to make war with him.
Part 6. Are we living in the last days? Revelation can now be interpreted quite literally. Here are just a few of the signs of the times to consider. Days of Noah repeating. Transhumanism. August 5th, 2019. First human monkey chimeras developed in China. Another article in The Scientist. Majority of respondents support chimeric animal research survey. August 15th, 2021. First monkey-human embryos reignite debate over hybrid animals.
The controversial project was conducted in China, rather than in the US, where the project leader is based, quote, to avoid legal issues, end quote. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong with such an experiment being carried out in China? Meh, don't worry about it. Apparently, a recent US survey revealed nearly 60% of Americans in favor of such research. Well, they're doing it, and likely have been for decades.
Revelation can now be interpreted quite literally. Increased longevity. Here's a Time magazine article, 2045, the year man becomes immortal. There's also a website, 2045.com, Avatar Project Milestones. Avatar A, 2015 to 2020, a robotic copy of a human body remotely controlled via BCI. Avatar B, 2020 to 2025, an avatar in which a human brain is transplanted at the end of one's life. Avatar C, 2030 to 2035, an avatar with an artificial brain in which a human personality is transferred at the end of one's life. Avatar D, 2040 to 2045, a hologram-like avatar. Beast of the Seven. What shall be the signs of the end? Matthew 24, 3 and 4. The bottomless pit being opened. The mark of the beast. The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. Here is Bill Gates' friend and new star of Microsoft commercial, Marina Abramovic. Now hand your children over to them to be. Get it yet? Revelation 18:23. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Think. The same person that believes the earth is overpopulated wants to save your life with a.
Check out this interesting interview wherein Anthony Patch discusses a coin that was stolen from a museum in Berlin, Germany, and how it may pertain to CERN and the resurrection of Nimrod.
The boat of Ra, which travels through Hades, that is something that requires payment for the dead to traverse hell, traverse Hades, to the more sacred, the better location, if there is one in hell. It is a position of prominence within the dead of hell. And in order to reach that position of prominence, you travel by way of the boat of Ra, and you have to pay for that boat trip. The thing, it just sounds really bizarre, but if you're looking at mythology, specifically if you're looking within the Egyptian practices, their worship of the dead, you begin to realize that there's a lot more at play within our reality than we are aware of. I often say you cannot separate the spiritual from the physical. So this gold coin was stolen from a Berlin museum, and the name of that museum, among four that are surrounded by water, which is significant in the occult, in the mystical, was Bode, B-O-D-E, the Bode, as in, this does not bode well for mankind. Mm-hmm. And this coin, from what I look at in my research, actually was intended to be taken to CERN.
This whole, I mean, obviously they tried to tell us it was a couple of individuals who actually broke into this place, heavily guarded. Nobody knew anything, no alarms went off, and they took it out in a wheelbarrow, and then there was a burning Mercedes-Benz somewhere close by. This all sounded like a distraction to me.
Yeah, I believe it was taken by boat, because that's part of the symbology, that's part of the ritual. I believe because the museum is there, as I said, surrounded by water, that it was spirited away on a boat, because it has spiritual connotations to the boat of Ra. And therefore, yes, the wheelbarrow conveniently left near the railroad tracks, and a ladder that was used, and in a nearby parking garage, the burning Mercedes, as you say. This is I agree with you. A complete distraction. So I'm just posting in chat right now the gold coin, but also the individual, this deity that operates this boat in hell, and this is who receives the payment to transport the dead spirits in hell. Now, what is even more significant is that this is going to lead to resurrection. This gold coin and silver, according to the storyline, is placed within the mouth, within the skull of the dead individual for this payment. And this coin, being taken to CERN, will be placed with the head of Osiris, the head of Nimrod. The actual DNA, the actual head, preserved in a clay jar, surrounded by what they call the sacred fire, which is monoatomic gold. It's called the dust of the pharaohs in the mummification of the pharaohs. They sprinkled the bodies with monoatomic gold. This sacred fire surrounds the DNA, the literal head of Osiris or Nimrod, because Nimrod was cut up into 14 pieces. And it will be placed in the center of the main ring of the Large Hadron Collider, and you have a graphic up in the chat room. The center of that large ring is called the North Area Impact Point. That's where the DNA will be placed for resurrection, and the gold coin facilitates that from the spiritual aspects, as I said, of the boat in Hades.
Wow. Many people believe that the first Gulf War was, in fact, not really based on what we were told it was. And in fact, when we went back after 9/11, that wasn't based on what we were told it was. In fact, that they were actually looking for Nimrod's DNA. Is there any truth to that?
Absolutely correct. That's where the head preserved was taken from the museum in Iraq and was taken to the Vatican, where it is now. And I believe the Vatican will move it to CERN because the Jesuit arm, the Black Pope, the Jesuit arm of the Vatican, actually runs CERN. The two principal leaders, both on the scientific and administrative side, are both Jesuits, as are many of the researchers, are Jesuit-schooled physicists and engineers. So this is a Jesuit-driven program, and the question often comes up, well, who's behind all this? Who pays for all this? Well, most of the countries in the world are involved financially, and many of them send their scientists to CERN and also have upwards of 60 or more member states that have laboratories around the world that receive information, data from the experiments at CERN, but also function as proof of concept laboratories, putting together the theory into small-scale experiments that are then upscaled once they're sent off to CERN for implementation. So these are a back and forth relationship between multiple labs around the world. But this is a spiritual agenda. This has very little to do with physics. The reason that CERN was built as the Tower of Babel is the process of this opening of a doorway, but it is also the process of the resurrection of the dead. And the resurrection requires the gold. And there's a whole background to that in terms of Enochian mathematics and language, communicating with fallen angels, obtaining forbidden knowledge. The forbidden knowledge obtained by Dee and Kelly, and up through, as you mentioned earlier, Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons at JPL, all the way up to today with D-Wave Corporation's interdimensional quantum computers, and CERN, and the work in genetic modification, genetic research, is all for the purpose of achieving immortality, the original lie in the Garden of Eden.
Strong's Concordance 5331, Pharmakia. The use of medicine, drugs, or spells, magic, sorcery, enchantment. Pharmakia, properly drug-related sorcery, like the practice of magical arts. The use or the administering of drugs, poisoning, sorcery, magical arts, often found in connection with idolatry and fostered by it. Tropically, the deceptions and seductions of idolatry.
He never finished college, he's not a doctor or virologist, he's an unelected, regular to Epstein Island, documented thief who owns virus patents and companies, who created the most virus-prone operating system on the market, who thinks the world is overpopulated and openly says the will do a good job of solving that problem. Come on, people! Please tell me why anyone should be trusting this psychopath with public health issues. If the church can't even stand up to this dweeb, how in the world is it supposed to stand up to the beast? I'm not saying this current shot is the mark, but I strongly believe it's a dress rehearsal for it. Don't believe me? Consider this.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
This publisher number for this patent is WO 2020 060606, and it's a Microsoft patent titled Cryptocurrency System Using Body Activity Data. Let's read the description. Human body activity associated with a task provided to a user may be used in a mining process of a cryptocurrency system. A server may provide a task to a device of a user which is communicatively coupled to the server. A sensor communicatively coupled to or comprised in the device of the user may sense body activity of the user. Body activity data may be generated based on the sensed body activity of the user. The cryptocurrency system communicatively coupled to the device of the user may verify if the body activity data satisfies one or more conditions set by the cryptocurrency system, and award cryptocurrency to the user whose body activity data is verified. This is mind-blowing. The number 060606, and this has to do with using currency that's directly connected to your body. It doesn't get any crazier than this. This is exactly what one would think of when thinking about a mark of the beast microchip style technology that would be used in the buying and selling of goods. This patent is about mining cryptocurrency, but it's still to do with human bodies connected to a device that processes money, in this case, crypto money. Let's read Revelation 13:16-18 one more time.
And he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their forehead, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name.
Let's take a look at the word mark. Let's turn to the Greek and look at this word closely and view its meaning, and then we will show you what the Father showed us. The Greek word is charagma. Its biblical usage of the word is a stamp or an imprinted mark. According to Strong's definition, it means a scratch or an etching, i.e. a stamp. The Dodson's Dictionary: sculpture, engraving, a stamp, and a sign. Now, let's go one step further. Let's look at the root word of charagma. Now, in the English language, how often does the meaning of a word change from the root version of the word? I know in English this is not very common, but I wonder if, in the Greek, the meanings of the word changes so much between the word and the root of the word. But here is the Greek word of charagma. It is the same as girax. Its biblical usage is a pale, a stake, or a palisade. Strong's definition is to sharpen to a point. A stake, a palisade, or a rampart, a trench. In Thayer's Greek lexicon, a pale, or a stake, or a palisade. Dodson's Dictionary: a palisade, mound for besieging. Okay, at this point I can see everyone is probably thinking, so what? You have to look at the definition a little and dig out what they mean by palisade, i.e. a mound for besieging. So we do a search for medieval palisade, and this is what you will see. I am sure most of you are still trying to figure out where this is going. Some may even be thinking how this could possibly have anything to do with the mark of the beast. I mean, look at the size of those logs. You are not going to put that in a person's hand or forehead without some serious damage being done. Keep in your mind the images of a palisade and watch this short clip.
A microneedle patch to a person using it looks a lot like a Band-Aid or a nicotine patch, but if you zoom in under the microscope, what you'll see is that there are some microscopically small needles. They puncture painlessly into the skin, they dissolve. Encapsulated within those microneedles is the which is then released into the skin after a few minutes.
Did you see it? Did you see the palisade? Talk about an interesting find. I just find it amazing, the resemblance between the palisade shape and the shape of these microscopic needles. Now, let's take a look at the DNA itself. Think about this point. If you create something a certain way with full knowledge of everything about this creation, how would you feel if that creation decided to change its own makeup or code into something that was not intended, thus altering the very fabric of your creation? Let me ask you this question. What happens if the genetic makeup of your body is changed from its original form, the form from which our Heavenly Father has created for us from the beginning of time? What will happen to it? Would it be possible that it could make us an abomination to the Lord? I certainly hope not, but it does worry me that they want to play with our DNA. Okay, and I'm sure there's another question that's coming to mind, and for good reason. Some may be asking, what about the mark itself? This process does not leave any real mark, so how could people tell if one has the mark or not? And I'm glad you asked that, because this is already being addressed. According to this article, storing medical information below the skin's surface, specialized dye delivered along with a could enable on-patient storage of history. MIT researchers have now developed a novel way to record a patient's history, storing the data in a pattern of dye invisible to the naked eye that is delivered under the skin at the same time as in areas where paper cards are often lost or do not exist at all, and electronic databases are unheard of. This technology could enable the rapid and anonymous detection of patient history to ensure that every child is The researchers showed that their new dye, which consists of nanocrystals called quantum dots, can remain there for at least 5 years under the skin. where it emits near-infrared light that can be detected by a specially equipped smartphone. Now, let's take a look at these quantum dots. Let's take a quick peek into what is used to create a quantum dot. The attachment of proteins, such as luciferase, makes quantum dots suitable for both bioluminescence and fluorescence imaging. Luciferase? Lucifer race? This will take us down an even further rabbit hole. But I can tell you that CRISPR and luciferase are used together in lots of gene editing programs, and if we keep going down these paths, we will be here all night, as the author of confusion is Lucifer.
Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
The fact that this Microsoft patent bears the number 666 is quite startling. A lot of us knew that these things were coming, but this is unfolding a little faster than most of us anticipated. This inevitable cashless society where humanity is to be microchipped at birth is right around the corner. This is most likely one of the many purposes of getting the 5G network up and running. The microchip technology that will be inside of people's bodies will communicate directly with the network, keeping track of the subjects at all times. It makes more sense to me now that they would need a more advanced communications network because of the massive amounts of people that will have these microchip implants that constantly transfer information to the network.
During this lockdown in March, Trump signed a bill that has fast-tracked his 5G towers across the nation, and they're being built everywhere right now. Let's read this article real quick. First, on March 23rd, the 5G rollout progressed even further in the USA, with President Donald Trump signing a bill aimed at securing America's 5G infrastructure. The act, titled the Secure 5G and Beyond Act, calls for a comprehensive plan to securitize a nationalized 5G grid in not later than 180 days.
I mean, are you absolutely kidding me? Now, this is from an article from Frontlines of the End Times. With each passing day, it's becoming clearer and plainer to those of us who are Bible believers that we are living in a very unique time period. So unique, in fact, that we might just be witnessing the kingdom of the Antichrist and the mark of the beast system being assembled before our eyes. Well, you can read the rest of this on your own, but I mean, come on, man, come on. Coincidental. October 18th, 2019, 2 months almost to the day before this entire coronavirus thing materialized, Bill Gates and John Hopkins have a tabletop 5-hour-long discussion on coronavirus and an outbreak, and then it happens. Bill Gates is all over this. So here's your problem. The reaction is a worldwide lockdown, and then here's the solution, also owned by Bill Gates. And this is Bill Gates telling everybody life can only go back to normal after we get a global fix. Everyone gets a ID 2020 virus, and then life can go back to normal. Even though this entire virus, everything about it is obvious. It's so obvious. Turn off your television and look for the facts while you still can. This is so obvious, it's satanic. I can't understand why people don't see this for exactly what it is. This is a very good article. It goes through everything here. You might want to look all this up on your own, because it's showing all sorts of crazy stuff here, like implantable quantum dot, microneedle delivery system. The value comes out to 666. I mean, come on. It's absolutely everywhere, and they're not even hiding it anymore.
People are starting to recognize what a monster Bill Gates is, and it took long enough. I mean, it's been pretty apparent from the get-go. This guy is all about depopulation, eugenics, and just world domination through... It's insane. He's just rubbing it in our faces. It doesn't get any clearer than this.
Giving life to the image of the beast. Genesis 10:8. And Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a giant upon the earth. He was a giant hunter before the Lord God. Therefore they say, as Nimrod, the giant hunter before the Lord.
People of the world, welcome to The Giant, the visitor attraction for the 21st century. The exhibition space featuring the Giant Experience, a glorious celebration of the great men and women of your country, inventors, artists, scientists, celebrities, and athletes. The viewing tower. See the city from the shoulders of a giant. roof garden. New dimensions in retail, gastronomy, and special events for diversity of occasions. The world's tallest moving sculpture. Its head moves. Its arms move. It speaks and sings. A place to behold heroes and superheroes. A space to celebrate the great and the good. The game changers. The icons of your city and country. Every hour, the giant transforms into an extraordinary person. From sports, science, characters, your favorite heroes, and recites poetry and words of wisdom to the crowds below. A space to celebrate the great and the good. The great men and women who have made this world a better place to live in. A giant opportunity. The world's largest selfie. An homage to human potential. The world's most awe-inspiring selfie. Visitors are scanned and instantly become a giant. An experience to share and remember for a lifetime. There's nothing like it on the planet. Imagine you can be the giant. If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. The Giant. Coming to 21 cities in 2021. Awaken the giant in you.
Fearful signs in the heavens. The return of the gods. The nations of the world gearing up for a great space war. Independent news article. Obama predicts new religions could arise if proof of aliens discovered.
Obama recently predicted the rise of new religions and a massive increase in military spending occurring once proof of aliens is discovered.
The strategy that Wernher von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie.
If all of us in the world discovered that we were threatened by a power from outer space, from another planet, wouldn't we all of a sudden find that we didn't have any differences between us at all? We were all human beings, citizens of the world, and wouldn't we come together to fight that particular threat?
Airmen have seen unknown aircraft off the Virginia coast every day for 2 years. And this comes ahead of an expected report from the Pentagon on unexplained sightings that one former official says will, quote, shock people. Okay, Juan, I have to start with you because you've been subjected to me talking to you about this for so long. You know I am all in. I love this so much. Even going back to Buzz Aldrin, who said the probability of extraterrestrial life is, quote, almost certain. Everything from naval fighter pilots to Avi Loeb and so many more. Tell me you're into.
Yeah, why not? It's so much fun. You know, I think that Americans love this story. This is a story that could bring us together. I mean, really, I don't care what your politics are. Everybody's interested. Everybody's fascinated by it. If there was ever a reason to build a wall, this is it. I mean, if there was ever a reason to go with,
wow, news alert.
President,
you know they come from space,
yeah,
right?
President Reagan. Remember President Reagan's Star Wars program that was to defend us against countries that would fire missiles at the USA? Well, we could build now Star Wars to protect us against the aliens. So I'm all in. I agree, Emily. This is fascinating. I don't know how real it is because there's lots of things that could be unidentified that wouldn't be aliens. But boy, would it be fun to meet some.
Oh, yeah. And Jillian, look, I assume they're all friendly. With your Nat security background, now, we know, of course, declassified programs like the Air Force's 1794, they're saucer-shaped supersonic, but there's so much more. And tell me you think it's real, too.
So what I will say is we now have former presidents, former directors of national intelligence to Republican and Democrat presidents, members of Congress, senior members of Congress saying this is a real threat. Now, as an example of how seriously the government is now taking this, in August, Emily, the Pentagon reacted their UFO task force. They call them UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena. So they don't call them UFOs, but this is real.
It is so real. And Kaylee, to Jillian's point, all you have to do is listen to Joe Rogan's podcast with Bob Lazar to know exactly how long the military has been knowing about this and incorporating civilians. So give us your West Wing insider info.
Oh, I don't have any for you. That's too classified. But I do have a few news. I do have a few news alerts. One agreed to building a wall, be it in space potentially.
I know it makes sense, but whatever.
Headline. News alert number 2. We can never agree on anything from a bipartisan perspective, but you've got Obama and John Ratcliffe, who was Trump's director of national intelligence, coming to a bipartisan consensus on UFOs, much to Emily's excitement. But look, for there being UFOs, we aren't really worried. We should be a little more worried, I think, than Emily is.
And all of it, he said, is a lie.
Gearing up for a great space war. Another war is coming. Revelation 19:19. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to make war against him that sat on the horse and against his army.
Make sure you are on the winning team.
Wow, what do you think of that, Jake?
Wow, man. You know, what an important piece of research. I know Rob was really trying to prove that there are future prophetic events that are still to come, and that even now, all the things happening on the world stage just show us how much closer we are to the fulfillment of a very interesting prophecy, right? And how preterism and those who believe that Christ already came or don't believe at all, that there's a lot of proof throughout history that there has been an agenda to convince them of that, and that as we look at the world and how it's heading, it's actually more of a proof that the Bible is true, and that, you know, Christ's return is imminent, and there's things that happen between now and then, which are, you know, mark of the beast, the deception, the ongoing deception, which he was proving with the whole presentation. It's not just with the medical industry, it's with space, it's with our history, it's with all these different things. So, man, what a really a great final presentation for Rob. He really nailed the point home, and I really appreciate you and your mom reading through that thing, man. That was a really well done presentation. Thank you guys for giving it to everyone.
You're welcome. I mean, he had so many detailed notes, and this was right after he passed when we started recording these from his notes from his last presentation. And my mom had always said this was the presentation that he was born to give. Even he said that, and he never got to give it. And so we did everything we could. It's very important to us because we wanted his voice to be heard through our mouths, if that makes sense. And so there is some of his voice in there. So for y'all that love him, his voice is actually in the presentation too. And I hope you guys enjoyed that.
Yeah, I know I did. I know a lot of people out there will. It's definitely timely. It's definitely something that those who were at that conference that he was just about to give the speech, they were all just waiting eagerly. They were like, what is this final presentation to Rob going to be? And so we're just so excited when you guys decided to put it all out. So thank you. That was amazing.
Yeah, and then next week we'll do full episode 10. We'll be back to normal. And for those of y'all who want the news for this week, you can go ahead and jump on our Patreon, patreon.com/Skiba News Nation. And Jake did a lot of detailed work on the news, and it's going to be great.
Yes.
So,
yeah. So jump over there.
We'll put a link.
Yeah.
We'll put a link below.
And I guess we'll catch everybody next time on episode 10.
All right. See you on episode 10.
See you guys.
Skiba News Nation family, thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. You can also help support this channel by getting yourself some Skiba News Nation merch. Also, we are proud to announce that we are now on Patreon, where you will get bonus content, shoutouts, and much more. Thank you again for watching and helping us stay on the quest for truth.
Huge shout out to all our Patreon supporters. Thank you so much for your support.
We couldn't do this show without you.
If you want to help support us, go to patreon.com/Skiba News Nation.
Hey Skiba News Nation family, my new book, Never Got to Say Goodbye, is now available. My book contains an up-close and personal account of who my father, Rob Skiba, truly was as a father and as a man. It includes over 100 never-before-seen photos of my dad and our family. A portion of the proceeds are going towards funding our search for justice for my dad, Rob Skiba. Visit skibanewsnation.com/book. Again, skibanewsnation.com/book. To learn more about the book, our website will show you where and how you can purchase my book. Also, you can sign up to be notified when my mom's book is ready. Her book will be a first-hand account of the 40 days of terror that my dad and our family experienced at the hands of the medical system that completely denied him of his human rights, and how they denied my mom's right to be my dad's medical power of attorney. Thank you so much for your support and for helping us stay on the quest for truth and carrying on my dad's legacy.